Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. And welcome to the show, everybody. We've got a great show for you today. We're hoping to make some people think a little bit differently about subject matters that they may not have really even thought about because of how people have told them to think about stuff. But I want them to do something a little bit differently. And Rochelle is going to introduce our guest because she can actually say her name the way it was meant to be said.
Yeah. Well, we have either professor or doctor. We consider her to be both. Laura Chávez-Moreno. Go to her website, which is her name, laurachavez-moreno.com. And thank you so extremely much for being here and doing the work that you do. This is incredibly powerful.
Thank you so much, Rochelle and Kevin. I'm excited to speak with you and to hear back from your listeners also. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. And by the way, if you are listening to this and you want to go into the chat and go into the comments, you can leave us a comment and we'll ask Professor Laura about it and we'll go from there. But first, I've got to ask you, because you have a doctorate, you are at the University of, I think, let me look, you're at the University of California and in Los Angeles in the Department of Chicana and Central American Studies and Education. She received her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Education in Curriculum and Instruction. She's written a great book that I really want you to go look at, which is How Schools Make Race, because that's an important topic. And, Dr. Laura, I don't know maybe I shouldn't use that. Professor Laura, I don't know why this book even needed to be written, but it does. And I'm so glad that you did, but I'm so sorry that there is some issues around race and growing up and kids of different ethnic backgrounds and how we all treat them and how education treats them differently. I think that's part of the gist of the book, isn't it?
Yes, Kevin, thank you. Thanks so much for asking this. And one of the things that I mentioned when I started, usually I kind of want to have the listeners have an idea of what I mean by makes race. And what I mean by that is schools make race not just by teaching about race, which some of us may have had lessons, but actually that's not that frequent. They teach about race, for example, what is race or what are the racial groups in our society, but it also makes race through the policies, through the practices that sometimes people don't even recognize as racial. And because schools are an important institution in our society, they help keep ideas about what is race and what are the racialized groups alive in our society.
You know, I've known a lot of people from Hispanic descent and Asian descent and African Americans, and I just consider people. And I love the wondrous diversity and the different types of foods that are available and the cultural differences. Why do we have a problem with that in the research that you've done?
Oh, thanks again for this question. So it's interesting to think about race in terms of grouping people, which is actually something that I think is a little bit different from, for example, race in terms of culture. I'm sorry, grouping people based on culture. So we could group people based on culture and understand the differences in terms of, like, I can make an observation that what you're eating was different from, for example, what I was eating when I was young, for example, or the languages we speak, or the religion we practice, etc. Those are the cultural practices that people have different, right? But race is a little different. Race in our society is this false idea that there are biological groups in our society, which has been shown to be false. That's not the case. But because we do have physical differences, people think that then that means that there has to be some type of biological groups in humans, but that's actually not true. They've tried to find this, and that's not true. The interesting thing is that race then still comes into this idea that because we kind of think that there are these differences, then race is the idea that then we have to put them in hierarchies. Which ones are better than others? And that's important if we have a society that's trying to privilege some groups over other groups based on, for example, these racialized groups. So that's kind of what's going on since the foundation of the country. And the problem is that we're still doing some practices, policies in institutions like schooling that keep reinforcing the idea that there's these groups and that there are these hierarchies.
Why do you think that? Well, I guess I know, but I'll go ahead, Rochelle.
Yeah, I'm thinking one thing that it's hard for me to understand, but I also can see fully now is we see kids and how they're born and how they're raised, and they don't care about any of those things. They'll get along with any of the other kids on the playground, no matter the differences. Is it through the school system that this is almost created before we go into adulthood? And is the education system to blame for that, or is it more us as humans and parents and caretakers?
Yes, so this is interesting because as humans, we're wired to look at these differences, right? But
Right.
we're not necessarily wired to think that one group is better than the other. And we're
Yeah.
and groups are not natural. We as a society kind of have to decide like this is what this group is, and then that's done by putting a group in distinction to another group, like as opposed to, right? Or different than.
Right.
So that happens not just in schools, it happens in lots of different ways. And one of the ways that our society creates these differences is through racism. So when we have practices that are racist, we keep the idea that there are differences in people. Let me give you an example from the book. So in the book, I show how, for example, a dual language program was trying to provide Spanish and English language education to both students who were learning English. For example, most of those were Latinx students, Latino students. They were learning English, but they were also learning Spanish, right? But their dominant was Spanish, I should say. And then in the same classroom, half of the other students were learning Spanish, so they were dominant in English, and most of those students were white students. So the model of the program was that they were learning the two languages together. And even though the program had this idea that the two languages were going to be equal and they both were, good to learn, etc., because we live in a society that still privileges English, there were still a lot of practices that the program did that privileged English. So then that meant that in the end, who were the students who were getting like the honors? They were the students who were dominant in English still. So when the students who were dominant in English were still getting the awards and the honors, that makes it look as if there are these natural abilities that these students have that just make them smarter. And that, again,
Yeah.
when we see that those students who are earning the awards are the white students, then we think like that's kind of like a natural, it's like an implicit way of understanding that, oh, that's kind of a natural thing for the white students to be smarter, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it's same vice versa, right? If they were in the other country, they were speaking Spanish and how that would take form in the other way. So,
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing about learning a language here in a place that's so dominant in terms of English. It's actually the same when you're learning a language in another country. They want you to learn the language, right? Like, for example, I was in Japan in March. When I was there, it would have been very helpful to know Japanese. I don't. And if I were to live there, then I would be expected to learn Japanese. And there's nothing wrong with that. So it's nothing wrong in terms of thinking that people should learn English, and people want to learn English. The problem is that in the history of the US, there's been this idea that is the language of the country, and it's been to the detriment of making sure that people, for example, who are indigenous are able to keep their language, and people who are wanting to, for example, speak Spanish, which was a language that was here in the US even before English, for them to be able to keep that language. So it's just kind of like creating boundaries about what's correct and who is worthy of keeping their own, like who's worthy of keeping their languages. So that's also something to consider.
You know, in the history of the United States, we have at one time or another considered an ethnic group to be less than. At one time, it was the Irish. Everybody hated the Irish because they were coming over here and taking their jobs. Sound familiar? And at one time, it was the Germans because they were different and stuff. And now, but they were assimilated because they were all white guys. We didn't like them because of maybe their accent, but they were all white guys. But what is it about the differences in how we look that is determining in a lot of people's mind that because you're, well, as an example, you're a white guy, you're smarter than if you are an Hispanic guy, which doesn't make any sense at all to me because I've dealt with both, but go ahead.
Yeah, this is great because, and your example about the Irish is a great example to have, because if we look at the historical record in terms of how the Irish were looked upon, you could see cartoons where the Irish were depicted as very similar to apes. So what they were actually not white at that time. In the US, they were seen as black. They were seen as less than white, for example. So there's the Irish became white. So we can see these different types of happenings for the Irish and for other groups. Now, it's interesting to think about what that means in terms of race being made in our society, because who is being seen as different is always something that has to be kind of trained. Like, for example, when I said that the Irish were seen as black, they were seen as lesser than that. And that happens in terms of sometimes it's not something that's a visual. So for example, in the book, I argue that the Latinx group, yes, there's this visual idea of what they look like, but the language also has a lot to do with it. So for example, people who may just by appearance look white, then you hear them speak Spanish and then you're like, oh, okay, I think they're not white. So there's always this ambiguity that people are also trying to figure out, like trying to place folks like based on what they look like, but then they're also being informed through other things. For example, their dress. So are they wearing, for example, some type of dress that they are associating with like Muslim religion? Then they would be like, oh, okay, maybe they're not white. So people are always trying to get little hints here and there to see kind of like where to fit people in these different groups. The problem is when we're thinking that the groups have the status, whereas one group is better than the other one. This is the problem that we have to also face in our society. That yes, we can be fine like noticing differences. This is normal. This is natural. But it is something that we learn when we're also thinking that then these groups are better than others.
Yeah.
Why don't we celebrate? Oh, go ahead, Rochelle.
Same thing. Yeah, no, what you just said, Kevin. Why don't we celebrate? Why can't it be a positive? I've had many people myself, if you see me in person, depending on the time of year and what color my skin is and how my hair is doing, whether it's super curly or not, different ethnicities of people guess different ethnicities of me. And I do speak Spanish, so it's a little bit confusing sometimes, but I've noticed that people do. They try to figure out how you're not a white girl. Wait, you speak Spanish. Wait, what are you? And this and this and that. But it's not in a negative way either. It's them trying to, okay, let me understand you so that I know how to respect you for who you are. And that needs to be the focus, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this also, because what you're describing is this experience that a lot of us may face, for example, living in the US and then being in different places in the US. So for example, I grew up in Arizona. When I'm in Arizona, people see me and they think I'm Mexican, which I am. But when I lived in Philadelphia, people would think I was Puerto Rican. And until I opened my mouth and started speaking Spanish, and then they're like, wait, she doesn't talk Spanish the way that Puerto Ricans talk Spanish. So then they would ask me like, hey, where are you from? So yeah, it's the same thing. People are always trying to figure it out. And if I can connect this to what you mentioned earlier, Kevin, about the Irish and the question that you posed even before that, when you were asking, like, well, why does this even exist? And the reason is actually in the historical record already. The reason that race exists is to divide folks like us from the upper elite of our society, because the upper elite of our society didn't want us to have any type of like multiracial alliances that were being formed to fight against very top elites. So what the top elites did was give more benefits to poor white folks, to tell them like, hey, you're actually better than the poor Black folks that are your neighbors. So poor Black folks, poor white folks were living together. They were organizing together. They were going to fight to have a better living situation, for example. And when elite whites saw that, they thought, oh, and their idea was genius, even if horrible. What they said was, we're going to give white folks a little bit more privileges in order for them to not align with Black folks. So this is actually how race got started here in the US. Race got started by convincing poor white folks that they were better than poor Black folks, and that you didn't want to associate that with them. You wanted to segregate from them. You didn't want to go to the same schools. You didn't want to go to the same restaurants, all this kind of stuff. That's what's going on. That's how race got made in the US.
We
Well,
need
you
to
know,
erase that.
yeah. What's interesting about that is when you're talking about the poor Black people as a race, that there is cultural and educational and other disparities within what their opportunities that they have, where poor white folks get everything that they want. And they're
Yep.
still poor white folks. So that, to me, that's more of a character flaw to the poor white folks than it is to the other racial groups, because they have all the advantages and they're still not, at least from my perspective. By the way, we're talking with Professor Laura Burchell.
Laura Chavez-Moreno. Go to her website. Sorry about that. My brain is going down rabbit holes. LauraChavezMoreno.com. Go check that out while we're on this break, and we'll be right back.
In just 45 seconds, so don't go anywhere.
You became a real estate agent for freedom, success, and real momentum. So why are you still stuck waiting for closings to save you? I'm Ophir Adar, founder of Real Momentum, and I help agents like you become seven-figure earners. My first client that I coached, brand new agent, made $250,000 back in 2006. What's the secret? You feed your white wolf. That's the part of you that's bold and unstoppable and a closer and able to build rapport quickly. So click Get Listings at Real Momentum and let's unleash your real estate potential.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Burchell. That's her right there. That's Burchell. And you know, the Spanish is such, to me, it's a magical language. And even when you are speaking English, sometimes you've got it's just the way the words flow. So use your Spanish and reintroduce our guest today.
Oh, yeah. Professor Laura Chavez-Moreno. Visit her website, which is hername.com. And what Kevin just said is such a good point. I want to touch on that before we move forward, because there's different versions of English. There's different versions of Spanish. There's, I hate the term, oh, you're Mexican, because there's, like you said, Venezuelans, Puerto Ricans, there's all sorts of different, you can come from, yesterday we talked to somebody from Zimbabwe, we have people from Nicaragua, and they're all different. And even though the language sometimes is the same, we have different accents and there's different versions of it, but we still learn how to communicate with each other. And why do you think, for whatever reason, we tend to pull a negative thought from that instead of say, oh, that's kind of cool, let's make it work?
Mm-hmm. Burchell, do you mean like when you say negative thought, do you mean like thinking of a different language as negative?
just as something that, okay, well, they're different, or I don't understand that, and that separates us, rather than to be curious about it and respect it. With wherever somebody is from, no matter what the color of the skin is.
Oh, I see. Yes. I think it really is some that type of behavior or reaction to hearing a different language is really
Mhm.
something that's taught in society. So it's not like a natural thing that humans do. We
Yeah,
obviously, um, it is natural for us not to understand all languages, obviously, but it is
right.
not natural for us to not be curious. That is something that has to be learned in terms of, do you take a stance that's curious, or do you take a stance that is cautious, or do you take a stance that is um, I don't know what would be like an even worse thing, right? Like that's
Right.
something that society teaches, like the kids, like for like how are different languages thought of in a society, and how normal is it for people to grow up hearing different languages? Because if you grow up in a place, for example, that is multilingual already, and you're used to not having to understand 100% of everything you hear, that's kind of a normal thing for you, perhaps. So then it's not something to be alerted to in terms of like, oh, that makes me uncomfortable, or etc. It's just
Yeah.
kind of normal. You won't understand everything that you hear, versus here in the US, where you're um, you're fed, and I'm not saying you, I mean like we're fed the idea that it is just English that should be spoken that should be spoken here in the US. This is a different type of like message the society gives its people, in terms of like, is it okay to even hear other languages? Is that kind of what you were trying to get at, Michelle?
Yeah, exactly. Because I just think of, what would it be like for somebody like me to go to another country, and I know that I have family in Mexico, and I know that there's white communities out there. They're respected, and they get along, and they have their cultural differences, but they decided to be there because they see the beauty in the way that they live, and they love the way that it is different. So I think that was perfect to point out, because as it does here in the US, I'm guessing every other country you go to kind of has those same things that they're also wrestling with, right? Like with English.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some countries that are more open to languages than others, and I would say English is in the US is really, really dominant. So but
Yeah.
even if you go to I mean, you can always find another country that is just more restrictive and has its main language being even more dominant. So there's examples both ways. It's just
Yeah.
that given that Spanish, for example, was a language that was spoken in the US even before English, um, the people who were here that spoke Spanish, the people who were here that spoke other indigenous languages, really suffered through the idea that it only had to be English.
Yeah.
And if you are not familiar with, like, I don't know, U.S. history, there was a period of time when California and New Mexico and Arizona were all part of Mexico. So they were settled by folks from, dare I say it, Mexico. And so there is diversity, and there still remains that diversity today. But I wanted to address the language thing, because I got to tell you, there are people in this United States who think they're speaking English, but they have no idea what they're actually speaking, because they're as hard to understand as everybody else is. Or if you go to like New England, it's like, yo, dude, I got to tell you, you can do. So, we have got regional differences and we've got ethnic differences. Why can't we all just stop this crap and get along? That's I'm sorry, that's my educated opinion. Stop this crap and get along.
Well, and I want to push that a step further before your answer, because like you've said, and what your school or your book is about is, we learn this through our education system. I don't really see it come from anywhere else, right?
Well, this is interesting. In the book, I show examples of teachers in this bilingual program actually trying to challenge these type of ideas, and trying to have students understand that there's a richness in the language, in learning different languages. And I think that was very well done in the program. There's obviously little ways that it could be better, but I think the program was really making a lot of strides in trying to have students, and students, because they were bilingual, I think students really, really took that to heart. The teachers were also bilingual. So I think that was something that was taught in the program, and people were very open to that and really were striving towards that. The thing in bilingual education is that bilingual education most of the time here in the US is really seen as only for learning languages. It's not really seen as a space to learn about race. So for example, there's ethnic studies courses that people could take, and then we could kind of think like, oh, well, that's where we would learn about race, etc. But the argument in my book, what I'm saying in the book is that any school, not just the bilingual program, but any school actually teaches about race, even if they want to or not. So even if the teacher doesn't want to teach about race, there's ways for students to learn about what is race and what other are racialized groups. So instead of taking the stance of, oh, I don't want to teach about race, it's controversial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, one of the things that I'm arguing in the book is that teachers should recognize that because our society is racialized, because race is always there anyways, there's always lessons, even if they're not explicitly or directly made, about what's race and the racial ideas. And because that's the case, then we should actually take a stance towards teaching anti-racist ideas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because
100%.
one of the things that we are coming to grips with as a country is that there are a lot more blended families than there ever were before. And so consequently, you have got different colors, different shades of people within the same family group, because they may have two different fathers or a bunch of different situations. But what I'm learning, and help me, Professor Laura, and you too, Rochelle, but I really think that the kids that are growing up today have got a completely different attitude about people who don't look exactly like them anymore, and that they celebrate it a little bit more because of the different shades and the different variants. And he's really cute. He's got olive skin. Where's he from? I think he's from Puerto Rico, and he's from and the Philippines. And he is just adorable. Is that true, or am I not rational?
I'd say you're 100% correct. Professor, what would you say?
I would
like
say
color.
yeah. One of the things that I think is that people sometimes, if they identify as multiracial or biracial, for example, sometimes I think that there may be more attuned to that. Actually, the different groups that we have created as a society kind of don't make sense. I think that you could people who live kind of like in the outskirts of this group, say that we have this group that is bounded or like together, and then they feel that like it doesn't make sense to how they live their own lives. For example, it doesn't make sense that like there's just this one group here and then this one group there, and then they see it. Sometimes people who are not multiracial can also notice that there are different things that these groups share. So then they notice that these boundaries that we have created, like this group likes that, this group is this way, etc., that they're really arbitrary and sometimes not even true. We just tell ourselves in order for us to be able to understand what the differences are of the groups. And that is actually really important for us to start challenging race, because race is not a natural group. It's not like something that is biological. It's something that we have decided to like say that if they look this way, they're in this group. If they look this way, then they're in that group. And there's always going to be people who are kind of like in the middle or like in the margins who we can't really place. And that's also kind of a pointer that, okay, actually, that kind of shows us that these type of like natural groups that we have created are really just arbitrary and not true. So that's something that I hope that when we're really being very looking at like the details, we can kind of see that like these racial groups don't really make sense. But in the end, they kind of don't really have to make perfect sense anyways in order for them to be so destructive. And when I say destructive, I mean harmful to folks who are discriminated against, large groups of people.
You know, it's interesting. I was just thinking in my own mind because at one time I was a general manager of a Mexican restaurant. I was a general manager of the Mexican restaurant, and I'm no more Hispanic than, and the thing was, we ended up having all the white people, and this is when I got there, this is the way it was. All the white people were in the front of the house, which means the waitresses, the bus people, the hostesses, the bartenders, they were all white people. In the kitchen, where nobody saw them, were all the ethnic people, then the dishwashers and the cooks and all that kind of stuff. So it was a natural divide based upon race rather than ability. And I would like to see that end in our world if we can. So, by the way, we're talking again with Professor Laura Chávez-Moreno.
Good job.
Sounded like you were a boxer. And her website is laurachavezmoreno.com. And go there and you'll find out all about her and the book, How Schools Make Race. We need to take our halftime break, and we're going to be right back. And Professor, at one point in time, I would like to talk a little bit about work ethic. Is that in your book? Can we discuss that just at all? Because I think there's a real difference in work ethic in between cultural stuff and things. So Brachelle's with I wish I could speak English. That would be good. Brachelle's with me, and we're going to take our halftime break, and we will be right back with Professor Laura Chávez-Moreno.
You're listening to Brushwood Media Network, the best in syndicated talk, news, and entertainment shows.
As you go about your daily life, look closer. As you gather with family and friends who love and support you, look closer. There are youth right in your community who don't have the home, warmth, and healing you have. So look closer. Every year across America, a staggering 4.2 million youth are homeless or trafficked. And for 50 years, Covenant House has worked relentlessly to keep them safe and protected. Tonight, 2,000 young people will sleep safely in a Covenant House bed. And tomorrow, they will wake up surrounded by love. They get clean clothes, hot meals, medical care, and a safe place to sleep. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In sites across America to help them fulfill the great promise of their lives. So look closer at Covenant House. To help or get help, go to covenanthouse.org.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Brachelle, and she found me somewhere, and we're just kind of hanging out. So, Brachelle, what do you think of this conversation? I wanted to ask you.
This is an important conversation. I think it, like you said, Professor, it's people steer away from it because there's so many ideas, there's so many opinions, there's so many statistics, and I do think that we need to try to alter the way that we're teaching history, because the way I learned history was not very factual, and I've come to figure that out, and it's been frustrating for me because there was things that I learned that were not according. And one question I just had to touch on you, that it was just a moment that I was thinking, a lot of times people will not mean to be racial. It's that they literally don't know any better and they don't understand. How can we try to bring a little bit of awareness to that and change the way that we're communicating or perceiving or acting when we have that kind of come up? Because many people would say, okay, she's a white girl, and others would fight against that. And just how do we kind of handle that and be more kind about it and understanding?
I think that one of the things that I try to, for me, is to remember that the way that I phrase things matters, but then it's also the way that I listen to things matter. And I try to take the stance of I would like to say something that I would, if I were to hear it, would not offend me, for example. And I would also take the stance of, when I'm listening to something, to try to take the stance of being generous and to believe that the person had good intentions in asking that, unless there was some evidence against it. So I try to take those type of stances myself. I'm not really sure, just generally, I find that those type of ways to think about it have worked well for me, but more generally, I would say that perhaps I would suggest the same thing.
Yeah, perfect.
You know, the interesting thing that we have going on in this country now is the fear of the other. Rather, if we're not, if for people that are different than us, and even quite frankly, even the white people are different from each other. They have different likes and personality stuff and all that kind of stuff. But what do you think it is? Is it just because it's convenient that the fear of the other, of people who do not look like us, why is that taken hold here in this country?
So one of the things that I think has happened in the U.S. is that there's been, for many reasons, I'm sorry, for many years already, this idea that we need this class separation. So elites have to be seen as on top. Obviously, they're elites, but as separate, as having something that's more close to, or something to be shared with, for example, folks who identify or who are seen as white, but are not elites, are, for example, working class, middle class, etc. So there has to be this type of way for them to how would I say, to affiliate with themselves, even though their material situation, how they live in the world, what type of resources they have may be very, very, very different, but they have to kind of align with each other. And one of the ways that's been done is through saying, like, those other people are the ones to fear. For example, the brown folks, the black folks, etc. Those are the folks to fear. Not so elites are good at, because they have a lot of power in society, they're very good at using that power in order to stoke fear, in order to stoke these type of divisions with people who, for example, in the middle or the working class, they could come together to then demand more from their government to be able to have better resources, etc. That's something that, if you have fear with those two groups, for example, like I said, the working class, the middle class, if you have fear with, like, working class poor white folks or working class poor black folks, if there's fear between those two groups, there's no way they can align with each other. There's no way they can work with each other, right? In order for them to unite and demand something better. So,
Do you?
Mhm.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to end with saying that this fear is a very useful tool in order to divide certain classes against uniting with each other.
In your research, do you believe this to be an intentional thing?
Yes and no. I would say yes in terms of the historical evidence, in terms of what elites in the U.S. have done. Yes, that's the case. I would say that's not true, though. For example, if we look at currently some of the folks who are hearing fearful things and trying to think of this as like an intentional thing. Do you see the? Am I making the difference
Yes.
clear? Or so I think that in terms of the historical evidence, in terms of elites, it's well documented that it was something that was done intentionally. But in terms of now, in terms of, for example, some folks feeling fear, etc., I think that's kind of something that some people are not really aware, like, where's this fear coming from? So if we're not really aware of it, sometimes it's not intentional, if that makes sense.
It's just because that's all they know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really hard to fight narratives that are about fear, because fear is something that's very, like, I don't know if the word was primordial, but something like very ingrained in us. We really do have to fight against it. Mhm.
And that's what we do here, Rochelle.
Yeah. On the flip side of this, before we take our last break, you wrote this book. and it is out. It's available for people to go and learn and understand what they don't. What has been your feedback from this book? Have you had anybody come to you and say, Laura, I see things differently now, and thank you so much for putting this in a perspective and a way of understanding?
Thank you for asking. And yes, I have had folks. One of the feedbacks, a feedback that comment like that I got was that it was very accessible in terms of reading the. Even though it's from a university press, it is accessible to folks who are, for example, educators or who want to learn more about how schools teach about race, for example. So that's something that I think people will find is accessible read. Something else that I've heard is that it makes one think differently about what race is, because a lot of the times ideas in our society is that race is just skin color, or that race is just something that is like a natural kind of thing in our society. So the book shows very clearly like how it is that our society is making ideas about race and making these racialized groups. So this is something else I think that people who are kind of tired about like thinking about race in like a really like simple way, I think that the book also presents with a lot of examples and with like accessible language, a different way of thinking about race.
Well, if we're going to change anything, we need to start it at the schools and how the kids interact with each other, and more importantly, how the teachers interact with the kids, because they're not stupid. They see the differences in how people are being treated differently. Would that be in your research? Is that true?
Yes, the students definitely saw differences in how they were treated, for example, and versus other group of students who were like in their own class. Uh, so they definitely saw these differences. And one of the things, and the book also shows, is teachers really taking initiative in order to be very conscious in how to teach anti-racism. So the book shows it begins by having examples, by providing examples about teachers doing that type of work.
So, for anybody that's listening, to hear from you as an educator, I think you are a high educator. What would you say that race is? How are we supposed to understand this word?
Oh, thank you. I think it's a word. We first have to understand that it's a social group. It is not biological. And I think we have to also think about it as um, a group that is made in our society in order to put people in hierarchies. And it's something that we see as if it's visual, but we actually have to use other ideas, for example, language and things like that I mentioned earlier, in order to be able to group people into those groups. So race is something that changes also. It's not always constant.
Very good.
Why do we want to group people together?
Yeah.
Well, this is, I can answer two ways. One, why do we want to group people together? This is a natural thing in the sense of like, we want to kind of understand if the person is similar to me or not, and like, can I speak with them in English? Will they understand me? This is like a natural curiosity that people could have, for example, or a natural way of kind of like interacting with folks, right? What's not natural, what is learned, is then putting groups in hierarchies, thinking one is better than the other. So the question, Kevin, could you repeat again, please?
Why do we want to group people? And
Yes.
why can't we accept people for who they are as an individual?
Yeah, so the second answer to that question is the historical evidence in terms of why is it that elites needed to make sure that the lower classes were divided. And that's really the answer for the second part of what you're saying, is that it is very normal for us to want to group folks together. And but it is also very normal for us to want to, with other folks, try to fight for a better situation than we have. And then in order for that to not happen with people who may share like the same type of resources, access to resources, etc., then you have to make sure to divide them. So this is what's going on in terms of race. Race is a tool in order to divide people so that they do not align with each other, and that they just keep fighting each other for the little bitty resources they have, instead of creating a more egalitarian society.
It doesn't make any sense to me because well, Rochelle's getting angry, I think.
No. I'm not angry. I'm almost mesmerized by this, because people's brains all work for different reasons, and we're all different depending on how we grew up. Professor, you helped us understand that our upbringing created that. It wasn't built into us, but I do understand maybe why they have done that and what you're saying, because if they hadn't, we as citizens would have full control of all of our rights. We would make the laws, we would make the changes, we would be the ones to have the say. And if that were happening, they maybe the upper class or the hierarchies of us thought that, well, they can't control that since they're poor, they're less than, right? So they thought of us as less than. What, no matter what race you were at that point, you were still a poor person. But to not say that they had the same education because they weren't provided isn't fair. And it's maybe because if they realized that we all had access and understanding to that, there wouldn't be a reason for government. There wouldn't be a reason for all these things, because we as humans would get along and understand and respect each other's boundaries and space, and it might just damn well be peaceful. And they can't let that happen. So
No.
we'll take this break, and then I just want to hear what you have to say about that.
What a radical idea. Peace?
Yeah.
Are you crazy?
No way.
We'll be right back. Are you looking for a powerful way to grow your brand while making a real difference? Well, Positive Talk is the perfect platform to align your message with inspiration, hope, and meaningful conversations. By sponsoring Positive Talk, your brand will reach an engaged audience that values positivity and connection. People who want to support companies that share their values. Take this opportunity to showcase your business in a space that uplifts, inspires, and creates lasting impact. Don't wait. Email me, Kevin at kmmedia.pro today to learn how you can partner with us and spread positivity while growing your brand. And welcome back to Positive Talk with Rochelle and little old me, Kevin McDonald. And we're talking with Laura Chávez-Moreno, and she has written the book, How Schools Make Race. And it's a book that needs to be picked up. It needs to be read, and it'll make you think. It'll make you think about perhaps a better way for us all to get along without calling each other the other, because we're all one and we're all together, and it doesn't matter what color our skin is or who we love or any of that stuff. We're all the human race, and I wish, Professor, that we would start acting like it. Do you have hope?
I definitely do. I have hope because we have made our society what it is, so we can work to make it a different type of society. So we definitely should have hope. And when we don't have hope, then we are definitely deciding to then make it into a worse place for us.
Can I tell you a quick story? When I was a general manager of a restaurant, when I first got there, we had high school kids doing the dishes. I don't know if you've ever been to a Mexican restaurant in the back of the house, but doing the dishes is a really greasy, icky, awful job. And they hired kids from the local high school, and they were all white kids. And half of them didn't make it through their first shift. We found their apron on the dumpster at the back dock as they said, "Nope, ain't doing this. I'm out of here." And so we ended up hiring some people that and this was back in the 80s, and Ronald Reagan had just done created the new laws that allowed immigrants to become citizens and to work. And these So we hired one, and who worked with two of the other kids. He came to me after his first shift and said, "Senor, I'd not work with these kids. Let me bring a friend in." So he brought a friend in, and then he brought another, and then there were two gentlemen, and then the one high school kid, and they came to me and said, "Senor, he and I'll do this work, and if you can get rid of him and give him $1, give us each $1 more per hour, then the two of us will do what the three of us were doing. The three of them were doing, and they were doing a lousy job." And they were sensational. And it's because of the work ethic that they came with. They wanted to do a good job. They needed to do a good job because they were sending money home, and they needed to make some extra money. And they even went to the extent of, when one of them wanted to go home for a couple of months, he brought another guy in and said, "Senor, I'm leaving for a couple of months, but this is Pedro, and I'm going to train him, and he's going to do my job until I come back." And I was perfect. And so, but in today's society, somebody might look at me and say, "You were hiring Hispanic people and you were paying them less. The fact of the matter is, I was paying them more, but you should be hiring white people to do that job." And it's just, they work so much harder and so much better, that didn't make any sense. So we've got a lot of misconceptions about people and their work ethic and what they're willing to do and what they can do and how smart they are and all that kind of stuff. I hope this book helps clear up some of those things so that people can recognize that we're all one, and that people can do some great work, and regardless. Now, Brachelle's got a lot of friends that are of Hispanic descent, and they all work hard and they all do a good job, don't they, Brachelle?
Yeah, I have Cambodian family. We are the same blood. One of them is next to me. I have lots of people in my family and my friend group that look nothing like me, speak any of the same language, grew up the same, have completely different culture, even work ethic. I, as a white person, joined into a Mexican family very early on when I was young, and I loved it because I gained so much from it that I was able to learn. I was around a lot of Black communities, and it really doesn't have to do with the language or the food or even really the culture. It just depends on the person. And there, I'd like to fight against this. You can give me your thought, Professor, but I don't think it is correct for us to say that we can blame what we've been through or understood on the way that we are, because you can always change and you can always learn something in a different matter. You just have to be willing to do it. Is that correct?
So one of the things that uh, I would say the book is doing in terms of like having us think about like what is race.
Hmm.
And let me see if I could tie what your comments were. But the way that I'm thinking about or wanting to show readers about how race is made is that, remember I mentioned that before, like in the historical, like in the past, elites gave poor whites a little bit more privileges than they
Yep.
gave poor Blacks. So that is how what race was initiated in history. But in my book, what I show is that that race is being continuously remade in our society by, again, uh, discriminated against one group, sometimes unintentionally. And when
Hmm.
that happens, that group kind of unites. they they like have affiliation with each other because they see themselves being discriminated against, and that could be because they see themselves being discriminated against themselves because of the way they look. For example, oh, we noticed that everyone who has darker skin is being discriminated against. Okay, let's all band together, kind of thing, right? Or they may notice like, oh, we're noticing that we're being discriminated against because we all speak Spanish, and then they join together. So when that happens, race is also being kind of reinforced, because then people kind of see that they have something aligned with other folks, if that makes sense. So racism makes those people, being racially discriminated against creates these different boundaries of what these different groups are. And then the people recognizing that racism and uniting against that racism also reinforces the idea that there are these groups in our society. So both the racist practice and the anti-racist practice, that the reaction is reinforcing the idea that there are racialized groups in our society. And a bilingual program does that through, for example, in the history of the US, most students did not have access to bilingual education. They were discriminated against by only having them learn English, or in school they were only provided the option to have English. Now, if you see a bilingual education kind of as an anti-racist movement against that, you can see that the bilingual education program will kind of lump students together based on if they want to learn Spanish and if they are, for example, Latinx or Hispanic or Latino, whatever you call them based on where you are in the US. Then you see them come together. And then again, that is kind of an anti-racist practice that kind of brings those folks together, if that makes sense. So in our society, in our society, these different forces are creating the idea that these racial groups exist and that they're kind of natural in our society.
So the way race is formed is like all the weird kids that watch anime, or the kids who listen to rock and roll, or the kids who listen to rap music, and the kids who are bullied, and the kids who are all on the jocks. It's just the same thing, how we categorize everything else in our life. We do it with race. So it's, to look at it that way is a completely different source of understanding, for sure.
Yeah, there's this similarity in terms of us being able to be really good at grouping folks, right? Like, do they like this type of music? Do they like this type of food?
Yeah.
Do they walk this way or that? We're really good at these type of distinctions, right? I think that's your point, Brichelle?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish we weren't so good at those kinds of distinctions. I would.
Yeah.
I would love us for all to get along. By the way, I wanted to ask you, and we've run out of time, but in these bilingual classes, I think it'd be really educational if the Spanish kids taught the white kids Spanish and the white kids taught the Hispanic kids English. Did they ever do that?
That's exactly what the program model was trying to do. Yep, that's exactly what this type of bilingual program was doing. It's called the dual language or two-way immersion program. And this is why they put them together in a classroom, since they were like in elementary school. So the students had been learning with each other. And for example, if you were dominant in English, you were modeling English, right? And if you were dominant in Spanish, you were modeling Spanish. So this is why they wanted them to be in the same classroom, so that they could hear each other and listen to each other and learn from each other.
And the kids that were learning the other language, their grade was based upon how well they listened to the other guy that was teaching them the other language. That would have been cool. Professor Laura Chávez-Moreno, the name of the book is How Schools Make Race. And Brichelle, her website is
LauraChavez-Moreno.com. I highly inquire you to read this book or order it or tell your kids to go tell the school about it. And I myself will do so as well. Laura, it has been an honor to have you here. The work you're doing is so powerful because no one else is willing to do it, and you're the perfect person for it. But before we leave, is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with for thought?
Thank you. I really enjoyed speaking with both of you, Kevin and Brichelle. And if your audience wants to purchase the book, it's available at Barnes & Noble, Bookshop, Harvard Education Press, and other major booksellers. And if they'd also contact their public library for them to put the book in their collection, or also their local bookstore, that would be wonderful.
Go to your local bookstore. It's the mom and pop that need your business, and tell them, by the way, I want you to get the book, How Schools Make Race. And why don't you pick up several other copies so that we can put that on the shelf so that other people can buy it as well. Because I think it's an important work. It needs to change, or we're going to end up being the same place that we are, and that's not good enough. So we can do a lot better. Laura Chávez-Moreno, thank you so much for being here. And any last words, Rochelle?
Just thank you. Keep doing what you're doing. I'd love to touch base with you again in the future, see what more you've learned, what more you're doing. And I myself will get the book. I've got so many to read, but if you get the book, everybody, please also give your reviews, give your feedback, and feel free to ask questions. I'm guessing that is very, very huge to you and this book, and the work you're doing is very important. So just thank you so much for being that person.
Thank you for wanting to have this conversation. I really appreciate your questions and thoughtfulness. Thank you.
This is an important conversation to have, and it needs to happen all around the country. And maybe we can make a change. So you're going to be really busy. That's all I can tell you. So, thank you ever so much. Laura Chávez-Moreno has been our guest, and I want to thank her for being here.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for listening to this episode of Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Our purpose is to provide everyone with a positive, entertaining, and educational experience. I would love your feedback and comments about the show, including possible topics and great guest suggestions. Please email me at kevin@kmmedia.pro. And remember, be kind to one another because each other's all we've got. That's Kevin